What's going on, y'all? Lovely people out there. It's a beautiful, what is it, Tuesday, Wednesday? I don't even know what day it is. Doesn't matter, man. We're just on here recording, having a good time. You got the FB God, aka the FB fraud, aka Dr. MD, aka vaccinated Noah. He's on the show. We're back on it together. I have another short, big facts only episode for you guys. Noah, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. We get to talk about another running back that I don't particularly like. So we're 2 for 2 on these segments so far. Without further ado, I think we got to hit the intro, Mike.
Oh, baby, hit it. All right. This week's episode, we're going to talk about something. And I think this is a good one to talk about because, in my experience, based on what I've seen on Twitter, based on what I've seen everywhere else, you either love this guy to a fault, that's me, or you just hate his guts. And that's Joe Mixon. All right. Joe Mixon is an interesting topic because he was a very highly touted prospect. The great Graham Barfield, creator of Yards Created, something that I basically subscribe to as a religion when it comes to running back prospect evaluation, has Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's the greatest of all time in yards created. Okay. Statistically speaking, he is the best to come out of college since Graham Barfield has been doing and since Grant Barfield has basically been mapping that yards created data. So that's really impressive for me. But, his NFL career has been a little bit of a mixed bag, right? You've seen some of the highs that get us so excited about him. And then you see some of the lows, which make us think like, this guy a bust? I mean, he's definitely busted at ADP, right? In prior years, he's been going in, the back end of the first, the early part of the second, sometimes the middle of the first. I think the reason why the discussion is more interesting now is because his ADP has fallen pretty dramatically. So, I'm gonna pass it off to you first, Noah, because on this show we like to let the haters flow first before we try and get in there with support. So, spit some big facts at me, man. What is it about Joe Mixon that's got you at a pause?
I think you hit the nail on the head when it's like, okay, this guy was awesome at Oklahoma. He fought off like Samaje Perine, some of the toughest competition you'll ever find. But honestly, like, he was very good at Oklahoma. He caught a bunch of passes. That's where the issue lies with me. Now, I don't dislike him as much as I did in the past just because the ADP has fallen to a point where now he can be acquired for like a low end RB2 price in Dynasty despite being signed for like the next 3 or 4 years. My issue is he's like the Christian Kirk of running backs where 3, 4, 5 years into the league, we're still looking at what he did in college and saying, look, he did this before. He can do it again because he showed it when he was 18, 19 years old. My
Mm-hmm.
problem is he's never been thrown to a ton in the running game or in the passing game. The only time he's ever topped like 40 receptions was like Zach Taylor's first year when we thought he was going to be the next Todd Gurley. He's topped out at 43 receptions. Every year he just hovers around like 30 to 35 catches. And I get that, around RB20, you're not paying that price for a guy like CMC, like a Barkley, like a Camaro who's going to catch 80 plus balls. But you do want upside when you make those picks. And for me, it's just way too inconsistent when it comes to Joe Mixon. I mean, this past year, he had one game with 39 points. The rest of his games, the other five, he had 52 total. So he was averaging like 10 points a game, which would have been the RB30 on a point per game basis, outside of that one huge game against the worst team in the league, the Jacksonville Jaguars. So for me, I obviously like the talent. I like the talent coming out of college. I've liked the talent the past 4 years. I don't think he's been a terrible running back. I just think that the situation does not breed too much opportunity for him to be a top five guy. Whereas other people in that vicinity, whether it be David Montgomery, whether it be Austin Eckler, maybe even
Mm-hmm.
like a Javante Williams a few years down the line, plus the longevity he brings to the table, is why I would kind of move away from a Joe Mixon. And, you know, I think I would prefer him to a guy like Miles Sanders just because we've at least seen them, hand the keys to the castle to a guy like Joe Mixon, whereas Miles Sanders seems to be wishy-washy, new coaching staff there. At least Cincinnati got rid of Gio Bernard, who for whatever reason was like taking up 50% of the snaps the past 2 years just because
Mm-hmm.
he had like pretty nice fucking quads on him. But now that he's gone, all they got is a couple fraud young guys. I do think that he's going to have a heavy snap share. The only thing that really worries me is I guess one, the offensive line, because instead of going for Panay Sewell, they went for Jamar Chase. And number two,
Best blocking wide receiver in the SEC.
is he might play left tackle this year. That's where they're at because Jonah Williams doesn't seem to be the best left tackle out of fucking Alabama, like Nick Saban was saying. But it just comes down to the offense that he's in. I guess the division that they play in because they have some pretty stout defenses there, and just I don't know, the inconsistencies he's shown to this point. He's 25 years old, so he's not a young guy anymore. He's basically 30. So that's where I stand with him. But around the RB20 to RB22, 23 price tag, if you can get him there around like six ish, I'm good with it. But at the same time, like I'd rather a round six receiver and then spend round one or two capital on a running back than vice versa, right? Spending round one or two capital on a Justin Jefferson or an AJ Brown and then going for a Joe Mixon. Give me, like you said before the call, you got McCaffrey at the 109. Give me McCaffrey at the 109 and then fucking, I don't know, Mike Evans in the seventh round.
Yeah, I got you. I mean, look, it's definitely like I recognize that I have like a full blown love affair with Joe Mixon, which isn't always rational. And every time I think I'm out, he just pulls me a little bit back in, right? And I'll tell you why he pulled me a little bit back in this past year. He's always had the workload, right? First of all, workhorse running backs are hard to come by. Guys that have 20 plus touches, it's really, really hard to come by. But the problem with him was he never got involved in the receiving game, right? But if we look at last year, this is like the first time, and I recognize, look, this is a small sample, and that is the danger of projecting here. But in the games that he did play, he had 2 targets, 4 targets, 3 targets, 6 targets, 8 targets, and 3 targets. So he only had less than 3 targets in one game. And I think that is really the key for me. It seems like they are trying to get him a little bit more involved in the passing game. And that was with Gio Bernard. So with Gio Bernard leaving, I think that vacates a lot of opportunity. I'm a very stout anti-vacated targets guy when it comes to wide receivers and tight ends and stuff. But I think vacated opportunity when it comes to running backs is a very real thing. So Gio Bernard leaving is one big uptick, but the fact that he was already seeing the targets before Gio Bernard left, that gives me some hope, right? And the downside here is he was not very efficient last year, right? People will go to yards per carry. He had 3.6 yards per carry. That's awful, right? And he actually wasn't that good on the juke rate side either. So he wasn't really adding anything to the NFL, to the offensive line, and the offensive line was terrible. So those are definitely two negatives going for him. But when you look at the volume, it's very, very hard to ignore. So if you look at the data here, so Joe Mixon, here are the only 3 players that had more opportunities per game. And an opportunity is defined as a target plus a carry. All right. Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook. That's it. There's 3 people last season that had more opportunities than Joe Mixon, who had over 24 opportunities per game. Right. So, if we discount that a bit, maybe you think he gets a little bit less work for whatever reason. That's fine. He still gets that 20-22 range. And that's still very, very elite in terms of volume usage. And when it comes to running backs, I mean, volume is king. I mean, we've seen mediocre running backs produce on subpar talent, but I do think that Joe Mixon is actually a pretty good talent. So I think those things combined is really what I'm coming to, is the numbers on the volume side and the numbers on the target side is showing some indications of going forward. Granted, I fully recognize it's projection to assume that he keeps up that pace, and I don't expect him to. But at the current ADP, where you're getting him in the 4th round of a super flex dynasty startup, I think he can kind of return that value. I want to get your thoughts on one thing, though. I mean, there was a lot of overreaction this past couple of weeks. The reason why I want to talk about Joe Mixon is because NBC Sports Edge, aka Roto World, aka Roto Bait Clickers, back in the day, they put out an article, not even an article, sorry, they put out a snippet that said like Joe Mixon unlikely to retain workhorse role, right? And you go and read in the article and you realize that it's a very, very poorly written headline by the intern that most likely did not read the article. But in the article, they talk about how, Joe Mixon has to do better on the pass protection side, right? In order for him to remain as a workhorse, or in order for him to remain in on 3rd down situations. And, I think the head coach, Zach Stacy, says something like, he's really, really good, but we don't need him there for
I like
75
that. Head coach
snaps.
Zach Stacy, shouting out all the fat running backs.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Zach Taylor.
Sorry, Zach Taylor. And he talked about how like, oh yeah, we don't need him in there for 75 snaps. First of all, no running back is playing 75 snaps a game other than Christian McCaffrey, who was literally out there for 90% of the snaps. But, to me, it's a little bit twisted out of proportion. Whereas, the head coach says we don't need him for 75 snaps, which is just factual. That's true. Nobody needs to play 75 snaps in the NFL, period. And then, but the coach, the OC, Bill Callahan, actually came out and said, look, I want Joe in there on all 3 downs, and he needs to get better at pass protection in order to do so. So it's a little bit of a mixed message there. How are you kind of reading those tea leaves there for Joe Mixon?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's a cop out, but I think actions speak louder than words. But then again, like the actions have shown, they're not bringing in any other running backs that can really compete with Joe Mixon. So it does look like he's going to have a pretty hefty snap share there. And I do agree with you on that point where, like, if you look around the league, how many other guys have this little competition? Like we were hoping DeAndre Swift would be
Mhm.
something this year. Now Anthony Lynn is pulling the Anthony Lynn card and saying that Jamal Williams is kind of a guy, so he might get touches. I think that can kind of be written off in Cincinnati. Like who's the guy that they drafted this year? It was like a was it undrafted free agent, like a or sixth or seventh
It
rounder
was like
last
a
year, like
sixth or
Travion
seventh
Williams.
round pick. Yeah, it was like a sixth
Yeah,
or seventh. Travion Williams was from a couple of years ago. I don't even remember who they drafted. It was a nobody.
yeah, it was a nobody. So it does look like he's going to be out there for honestly maybe 75 snaps a game because they have nobody else. I just think it's going to come down to how good this offense plays, how well Joe Burrow comes back from his injury in his second year, either progression or slump. I do think though, the more we talk about it, like who would you prefer, Miles Sanders or Joe Mixon? Because I do think Joe Mixon's going to have a higher snap share. And if we're talking like offenses straight up, I'm not so sure that Cincinnati's going to be any worse than what Philly's got.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, Miles Sanders currently going at pick 59 as a RB20 overall, right? And Joe Mixon currently going at RB15 at pick 44 overall. So quite a decent ways ahead of him. And Sanders is also like an interesting case. We talked about him last week. Like he was very involved in the passing game, and then he went to not involved in the passing game at all. So that kind of hinges on Jalen Hurts. To me, it's pretty close, man. I mean, I think I still I'm pretty sure I have him in like the same tier right now, so it's very hard for me to make decisions for guys in the same tier. But man, I think I have to go with Joe Mixon just because I think his volume is a little bit more secure than Sanders. Like Sanders, they brought in a bunch of washed up guys, but you just don't know what the coaching regime is going to do there. Um, so I think if you're in a contending team, I mean, if you're in a contending team, that's the only time you're going for these guys, anyways. So I think maybe the slight edge to Joe Mixon. But I think in terms of receiving upside, I think we've already seen that from Sanders. So if you want to shoot for a little bit higher upside, probably have to go Sanders.
I think I completely agree. I also think that Joe Mixon might have more longevity despite the age, just because I think he's a better player and he's proven that he's a better player than what Miles Sanders has been to this point. So I think we're kind of on the same page. And I don't think we have to like completely disagree going forward on these two. Like if there's just good debates to be had, because I know he's a contentious player, we can just stick to those type of guys. And I know like Claypool's kind of hated. We hated him last year. We love him now. Same with
Oh
Brandon
yeah.
Ayuk. So those might be guys you hear about in the future.
Yeah, exactly. All right. That's all we got for you guys. Like I said, these are quick and short, big facts only. So, until not next week, but I guess in a couple weeks, we'll probably break down one of those guys that Noah was talking about. We like to talk about the flavor guys that actually have some actionable paths, in terms of their values, very debated, and, try to help you make some of those decisions in your startup draft. So until next time, that's all we got for you guys.
Peace.